Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's PMI Friday webinar, Improve Your Cost Base with Rich Seddon. My name is Susanna Clark, and I'm going to be facilitating the session today. So that includes running the Q&A desk. So we'll be using the Q&A function throughout this presentation today, and you can find the Q&A button on your Zoom control panel. Please do keep your questions coming, and I will put these questions to Rich during the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link via email early next week to the full recording of both the audio and the presentation. As usual, we're broadcasting live on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So to those of you who are joining us through these live streams, we welcome you. To be able to participate in polls, receive the recording via email, and make suggestions for future topics, please do register for our upcoming webinars at pmi.co.uk/webinars. You'll find the full schedule of events here. Finally, from me, before we get underway, after the webinar, we'll send all registered participants a short Voice of the Customer survey. We'd be really grateful for your feedback. That's obviously how we learn. And we're also really keen to hear your suggestions for future topics for these Friday webinars. So having said all of that, I will now hand over to Rich. Thank you.
Cheers, Suze. And good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to be with you today, and I'm looking forward to delivering this webinar for you. As Suze just mentioned there, we'll be using the Q&A functionality. We'll also be using the chat functionality too. So if you've got any comments or observations that are not necessarily direct questions, please do post those through, and we'll make sure we build in time to review those as we go through. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Rich Seddon. I'm one of the managing partners at PMI. My background is in corporate finance and economics. My contact details are on screen at the moment, email address, and also my LinkedIn ID as well. So please do feel free to link in as with myself and the company page, which I know Suze has shared in the chat box earlier on. On the LinkedIn page, you'll find lots of news and announcements from us, and it's where we release most of our communication these days. So keep your eye out there, as well as post any questions there too for those of you that are joining on the live streams. So what we're going to cover today is this challenge. The title amused me there slightly when Suze described it, Improve Your Cost Base with Rich Seddon. So I'm not going to do it for you, but the webinar is going to be around this challenge that we're all facing in many different ways and settings of addressing the fundamentals of our cost bases, the need, particularly at the moment, to take out cost, and how do we deal with that challenge. I'm going to talk you through some of the foundations of what we call process innovation in order to do that, and then link that, once I've talked through those foundations, through to actual actions for cost reduction using those process innovation methods. And that'll be peppered with observations, recommendations, and factors for success. We've got a couple of examples in here as well from real work we've done with clients that we'll talk you through as well to hopefully bring this thing to life. So again, we welcome your comments, questions, and observations as we progress through. Got a couple of polls coming up too, which would be great if you could to kind of take the temperature of the room. It'd be great if you could participate in those. So let's talk about this challenge. Take cost out, take out cost. Sometimes that's all we're given. Many of us right now are being asked, perhaps more than ever, to reduce cost. But as this says on screen, there's very little direction sometimes given other than take cost out. Or conversely, there could be very specifics given. One thing's for sure, we must respond. And when circumstances require it, we have to staunch the flow. But the eternal question is this: how do we do that? And in addressing how we do it, it's this point here that's one of the most important. Surviving a current challenge in itself is probably not enough. Our ambition when reducing cost must be to meet any challenge, not just the current one that's front and center, to survive, to prosper, and to thrive whilst transitioning into whatever new world may be upon us or upon you at the time. And to do that in an efficient, effective, agile, and adaptable way. I'll be talking you through what I mean by some of those elements as we go through. So hopefully this is starting to set the scene. The particular circumstances are unique as ever to your individual situation and your processes and your business. But at the top level, the challenge, this hopefully resonates with you. So on that note, this is a model we'll refer back to throughout this presentation. And it's critical to understand because the point of view I'm coming from is this. You get what you get by doing what you do and thinking what you think. So context is a concept that I'll be talking about throughout this webinar. The context here that I'm referring to is where our systems and processes that we have today, where did those come from? And the theory is this. The results you get are driven by your systems and processes, which are a result of decisions you have made or others have made, which is based on thinking and theories, and in turn, based on assumptions and attitudes, some of which will be conscious, some of which will be unconscious, but they draw together to result in what you see before you today. And my point about context in this circumstance is trying to be aware that not just look down the bottom part of this model where you see systems and processes, i.e. the systems and processes that are generating the cost that you're dissatisfied with, but to think about the context of where they came from and why were the decisions taken and what were the attitudes and assumptions that they were based upon. And exactly the same things applies with this model here when you're thinking about how to reduce cost with your own theories. And I'll talk about proving and disproving evidence and theories later on. But again, this model I'll come back to over and over again to set the context of the things we see before us that generate the cost that we are dissatisfied with. And the points of these, our assumptions influence our judgment and our decisions, and therefore the knowledge and experience developed over time, over many years, our thinking and thus the decisions we make, and the thinking, the knowledge and decisions, which often predate us. And one of the examples I'll be talking you through later on is precisely that circumstance. But remember this, those assumptions, the theories and the decisions made were in the context of the environment that was around at the time at which they were made. And they may have been relevant and appropriate for the time, and they may no longer be today. Similarly, let's not dismiss it, they may well still be relevant. But our mission here is to understand that, develop new theories, and test them out. And the question critically we're seeking to answer here is it still good enough for today, and will it more critically be good enough for tomorrow? Okay, so let's think about this model here. The perpetual leadership challenge when it comes to cost reduction. I've got the scales here in the middle. This is a constant adapting battle of balancing these elements out. The efficiency, effectiveness, and adaptability/agility of our processes. Where do you compromise? Where do you gain when it comes to cost reduction and taking cost out of your business and therefore your processes? What's got to give? What increases? What decreases when you think about these three elements? So just to explain what I mean by these, efficiency. So typically the amount of resources required to meet the customer requirements, the internal resources. Typical examples, number of resources used, cost of operation, productivity, utilization, overhead, cycle times, defects, rework, etc., etc., etc. On the effectiveness side, it's how well the process or processes meet the expressed customer requirements. So some external measures, typically things like value for money, ease of use, consistency, on time in full, it's visual appearance, reliability, things like that that are evident to the customer. And then finally, down here with the adaptability and agility, adaptability is the core quality a business needs if it is to survive and prosper in an ever-changing environment. And agility is the ability to do that and do it quickly and easily, both quickly and easily. Typical things: time to react to change customer demand, percentage of demand change that was actually fulfilled, number of approvals that might be needed in order to facilitate a demand change. For example, the list of these on all three elements is endless. I'm just trying to give you an idea here of the kind of context. So what you've got in front of you is the perpetual challenge to balance these up and together and be mindful of all three of them. And rightly so, and hopefully you'll be thinking, where's the customer in all of this? And we'll come back to that. But it must, one of the points I'm going to make repeatedly here is to take into account the customer requirements, and critically with cost reduction, the customer impacts. And again, it comes back to this point about context. Okay, so just going to move something that's out of my in my screen here. Okay, great. So before we go any further, we'd like to progress to a poll and understand the cost reduction pressures that your organizations are facing right now. Let's get a feel for this. So the questions we're asking: in your organization, 1, we're currently actively reducing costs. 2, we know we need to reduce costs, but don't have an active plan. And 3, we're not currently under pressure to reduce costs. This is just taking the temperature of the room, see what we've got here. So I can see that poll's now been launched and it's on screen for you.
Yes,
so
it has been launched. A massive start with "we're currently actively reducing costs" from the room. So really interesting to see that that's really where most people are feeling the pressure at the moment. We've got some people saying we know we need to do it, but we don't yet have an active plan. A very small percentage who are not currently under pressure to reduce costs.
And again, if you're in the live streams, please do drop comments into the LinkedIn or Facebook streams as well as to your response.
Okay, so just anyone who is left to vote, please do cast your votes, and then I will end the polling and share the results with you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
so there we have it.
Those are on screen now. So we've got 77% of attendees currently actively reducing costs. 19% we know we need to but don't have an active plan, and 3% we're not currently under any pressure to reduce costs.
I don't know about your thoughts, Rich, but that feels pretty indicative of what we're hearing elsewhere at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably one of the most recurring themes at the moment. Reduce cost and manage resources more effectively are two key recurring themes that we're seeing with clients at the moment. Okay, thanks, Suze. So, interesting. I think we just I've just proved one of my own theories here, which is this is of relevance to us right now in the circumstances that everyone is facing. So on that note, then, let's think about the foundations for process innovation and how we describe this as the route to cost reduction, and for that matter, lots of other challenges. So innovation, what do we mean by innovation? Let's get this out first of all. UK Department of Innovation and Skills, UK Government Department, their definition is: innovation is the successful exploitation of new ideas. A second definition out of a sample of 2 that you have on screen is from the Government of New Zealand. Innovation is the creation, development, and implementation of a new product, process, or service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or competitive advantage. Now, I like both of these for different reasons. The first one, it's super simple, and I think it's easy to express. The second one, though, does more for me because of those three words there in the first sentence: the creation, development, and implementation of a new product, process, or service. So neither is right or wrong. I think it's useful to clarify. The term innovation is thrown around a lot, and it's not necessarily spangly new ideas, as it were. But these resonate, I think, for me. So just view it like this. Innovation is often viewed as the application of better solutions to meet new requirements, unspoken needs of existing market needs. However, no matter what the setting is, the process of innovation itself happens through the provision of more effective, efficient, agile, and adaptable processes. So think about that in the context of cost reduction. Certainly my experience working with many different companies in many different settings is that final sentence there, the process of innovation, rarely happens when it comes to cost reduction. Sometimes it does, but quite often not. The focus is on getting the number out and the number alone, with insufficient attention to what this can mean in terms of provisioning more effective, efficient, agile, and adaptable processes. Not always, and I'll repeat that, but predominantly in my experience. So some foundations then. The aim of any system must be to satisfy customer needs of some variety. However, in this context, sometimes it's worth cautioning against the belief and the mantra that the customer is always right. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. I'm not saying that that is an invalid theory, but it's worth challenging and thinking about sometimes, because we have naturally an explicit set of theories about our customer needs and wants and views. The key thing, now here's my first reference to context, is the context in which those processes and systems have been designed to meet those needs. Are they still accurate and current? Certainly in my experience, the power of assumption takes over a lot of the time. And what I said earlier on, we get what we get by doing what we do, is a quite common event. And that's particularly worth challenging when it comes to cost reduction. Because in order to be innovative in the way that we're looking to be here, you have to rethink some of these approaches that have generated the processes that in turn produce the cost that we're dissatisfied with. So no matter how agile or continuous improvement focused we are, systems and processes evolve. And it's clear that we must do more than just maintain pace with evolution. We must get ahead of it. And central to that success is the next generation of improvement will depend upon realizing the natural potential of people to innovate and align this to a common and worthwhile aim. All strategies, approaches, and methods must build on this fundamental approach. Okay, so I promised you some foundations, and there they are. So let's bear that in mind as we progress forward. Here's a theory for us. Today's reality equals complexity. That might resonate. I'd love to hear from you in the chat if it does. So let's again move to a poll. Second poll here, and just see if you recognize these. Now, this isn't a mutually exclusive response. You can answer as many of these that apply. I'm just interested in getting a feel for this. It's a new poll for us. So in your organization, complexity makes it hard to run the organization. Our focus is more often centered on run the business, and we become bogged down in the detail of managing multiple complexities, interfaces, and interactions. Busyness is the norm, so it's often difficult to focus on improvement. And finally, our customers experience inconsistency. So that's on screen now. Have a think about those options and respond to as many as you think as applies. Not one greater than the other, it's all that apply.
Okay, as you say, Rich, thanks for that. The poll is launched. Very interesting to see how in this example, we've got a lot of movement around the bars, which is making it look initially as though all apply. Right now, at the moment, leading the pack is number 2. So the focus is more often centered on run business, and we come bogged down the detail of that, as opposed to being able to take the time out to improve business, perhaps. I know certainly that again, often that's a conversation we're having with clients. Is how do we make that time available to improve the organization when we're busy running it? So I'm just going to leave that on the screen for another, open on the screen for another few seconds. And then I'm going to close the poll and publish those results for everyone to be able to see. So you should all now be able to see those results.
Okay, and Zoom has helpfully moved those around for me. Right, I've got them back on screen. Okay, so complexity makes it hard to run the business. Fair amount of traction there. By far and away, the one that's resonating the most is the point that Suze was just talking about there. We're focused on run the business. Run the business. We become bogged down in the detail of managing multiple complexities. And then clearly the other two have got some traction as well. So isn't that fascinating? And I find this context so common that the day-to-day takes over, and making space for improvement, and particularly the kind of process innovation that we're talking about here, falls to the back of the queue. And isn't that ironic when it's got the most potential to influence our cost base on a sustainable basis? Not just a one-off hit, but a sustainable basis. And you'll hear from me shortly when we're talking about the factors for success in cost reduction on that very point, and some concepts around governance and making the space as well. So thanks for that, Suze. Thanks everyone for responding. So what's our proposition for cost reduction? I'm going to take you through some factors for success here. Number 1, here it is, bang up front. Understand the process context. So when thinking about cost reduction, it is critical for sustainable success that I just mentioned to understand where and in which process the cost is generated. And within that, understanding what's upstream and what's downstream. The two things I see most often in unsuccessful and suboptimal cost reduction programs is point 1 and point 3 on this slide right here. Failure to understand the context and failure to understand the impact upon the customer. Those two, by far and away, appear most often. So what do we mean by the process context? It's understanding where that individual cost is being generated and which processes are generating, not just going after the P&L number, not just looking at the number itself in isolation or the product or the service, but the process by which it is generated. And now let's take that context back up the line. Think about the model with the results and the mindsets earlier on. If you've identified the process, where are the assumptions and the thinking and the decisions that have been made, and what were they? Have we adequately explored them before deciding to cut that particular type of cost, or before deciding the way and the method that you're going to cut that particular type of cost? And ask yourself this question: in that context, where are these processes generating avoidable and unnecessary cost? Suze, I can see you lurking on my screen over there that you've got a question on the desk.
Oh, challenge, I don't lurk.
That's very true, you're not a lurker.
We have a question in from Tom, which is related to the first point on this slide. And he says, can you give an example of what you mean by disproving theories? Okay,
sure.
Sorry, I think I've misread that. So sorry. So can you give an example of upstream and downstream theory processes?
Yes, of course.
Sorry.
I suspect I'm going to do both now because you planted the seed in my mind. So whoever asks the second question, I'm on it. Okay, so what do we mean by upstream and downstream? Financials, particularly P&L financials and corporate financials, are sometimes, but very rarely, linked directly to the processes that generate those costs. I've seen it a handful of times done effectively, a multitude of times done in part, but quite often when you look at when you start at a P&L review where you want to take out cost, they are put together for a multitude of reasons, often system generated. They can be departmental, which you could translate into a process. They can be functional, product based. But what we're after here is a clear understanding of the context by which that cost is generated, not just the number for the result, but the process that generates that result. That's the key indicator that I'm talking about here. And the point around, because I've got it, and I think I'll elaborate it more on the next slide around proving and disproving theories. It's essential here too, because when you're thinking about the context, there are often assumptions underlying where cost is being generated. And I've seen time and time again when they're investigated correctly using the CI tools that so many of us are familiar with, when they're investigated properly, they can be used to disprove inadvertently those theories as to where the cost is actually being generated. We see that time and time again. And I've got a great example that I'll talk about on the next slide on that, actually.
Thanks, Rich.
No worries. So just to finish off on this slide, where's the customer? I said earlier on that the two key elements here that we see most often is process context, which I've talked about, and where's the customer. It is absolutely critical. People take this for granted, quite frankly, but it is critical that when proposing cost reductions, you need to understand and be absolutely clear on defining how these cost reductions will impact the customer, and ensure that the organization is aware and comfortable with them. And let's face it, ideally, let's not put a negative spin on this. Ideally, cost reduction should benefit the customer through more efficient, more effective processes. And there's an example I'll talk to you about very shortly on that note. So finally, on this slide, the central point here, are you ready for it? Do you have the right people with the right expertise to make informed decisions? The key point here being informed decisions. To make cost reduction truly effective, and by effective, I mean sustainable. It's not just a one-hit wonder, but it is sustained. You need to involve the people who work in the process that understand how the work works to make informed decisions. I've lost count of the number of times when I've seen cost reduction programs making ill-informed decisions because they're only looking at the result, they're not looking at the process that generates the result with which they're dissatisfied. So thinking about that, some more factors for success. Being prepared to change course. Setting out to disprove and not prove your initial theories. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example of that. We all like to be right, yeah? Myself particularly, as my colleagues I'm sure will endorse. But being prepared to change course in a cost reduction program is critical if we're going to make these cost reductions sustainable. So recently, last year, working with a client who appointed a new general manager to one of the divisions of the business. And he'd come from a very similar operation, slightly different commodities, but a very similar operation in another part of the industry, different company. And his immediate, upon his arrival, he rightly so reviewed his cost base and spotted that the price for raw material in this circumstance, in this new business that he'd taken over, was substantially higher than it had been in his previous business. And rightly so. He asked the questions, did some research, understood why it was, and his analysis showed that there were hundreds of thousands of pounds per month being spent additionally per kilogram of this raw material than he'd paid in his previous business. Spec was pretty similar, not quite the same, being sourced from a different place, But in essence, it looked pretty similar, and he recognised, with his eye and his bonus, he recognised that he could make quite a big impact on the bottom line this year, quickly and without pain, by renegotiating with the suppliers. So, in his circumstance, we took that theory. His theory was save all this money. We definitely should not be utilising these suppliers. Switch to this other supply. All will be well. Now, the challenge that the project team put to him was about context and understanding the context of the decision and the processes that they had in place and the contracts that they had in place with those suppliers. And by stepping back through that model earlier on that I talked to you about, the assumptions and the decisions that had been made that resulted in the processes, and in this case, the contract that they had today, it became clear that in the past, the company had actually used this alternative supplier. And what was critically different, that he didn't understand the context of the process because he was new to the business, was that the machinery they used to process this raw material was different in his new business. And there was a particular chemical content in the source that they were paying extra for that wasn't declared on the spec. It looked essentially the same. But over years of developing the process knowledge, it ran much smoother through their machines because they had a different type of machine. Okay, so it's not scientifically defined, but what was scientifically defined was the test. He had a theory, and he willingly embarked to set out to disprove his own theory. So in this circumstance, we ran a test. We put PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, into action and bought a small quantity, safe experiment, small quantity of this material to run on a few machines for a week to see what happened and how they performed. We monitored, established how we'd know a change was an improvement or a deterioration for that matter, monitoring things like waste to recycling, machine uptime, and similar kind of measures. And on all counts, the experiment failed. So it was a really interesting example of a guy who had a huge amount of industry experience, but without understanding his process context, i.e. what happened to his product once it went through this new factory that he'd never run before, and understanding the context of the decisions that had been made in the past, so again filtering through that model, he was able to disprove his own theory and willing critically to change course. He did not embark on it because he realized that it would cause him more aggravation. Now, there's an interesting point about bonuses and incentivization in this circumstance, because he was incentivized purely on raw material. In one big part of his bonus scheme was incentivized on raw material impound cost reduction. He could very easily have gone for that, but it would have caused him problems down the line. So fantastic example and fascinating, really encouraging to see that he was willing to come along with us as a project team and test the theory and indeed disprove his own theory. So clarity and discipline, being clear on your governance process. Who has what level of authority and how a decision is going to be made quickly and accurately. Just exemplified that just now. By not doing this in isolation, by having a clear decision-making process where we understood the data on which we were making the decisions, helps a great deal to make the cost reductions in the right areas and make them effectively. And here's the thing on the final point, the sustainability, looking beyond the short term. Please do not misunderstand this. We're not saying that short-term cost reduction is a no-go or shouldn't be done. Far from it. The CI tools, when used properly, as we've just heard, with a PDSA cycle in action, allow you and enable you to get going fast. But seeing beyond the short term is critical if these things are going to be sustainable and you're not going to cause rework within your organization later on. So consider the impact of the wider impact of what the cost reduction might be, and be honest, and really be honest. Identify both the good and the bad, because once you've got the picture of those two, you can do this. You can consider the new risks that are introduced into your processes. All cost reduction and all process change can present new risks. Let's not pretend it can't. They can. The key is identifying what you can do about those risks. And on that note, those of you that may have joined my Making Better Decisions webinar a few weeks ago, Making Better Decisions Faster webinar a couple of weeks ago, will recognize this piece here, risk versus uncertainty. And I've put it back into this slide because I still continue to see this, the confusion and muddling of these two things. So here's the definition I'm putting forward. This was Frank Knight's definition going back to the 30s. Risk, when the probability of an outcome can be calculated, versus uncertainty, which is when the probability of an outcome is not possible to determine, the so-called unknown unknowns. So with that mindset, you can start calculating and doing something about the one on the left, the true risk, that you can calculate the probability and therefore evaluate and mitigate and put mitigating actions in if necessary or if desired, or choose to take the risk. No decision should be risk-free. But what we key to this kind of mindset here, and I think it's particularly relevant to cost reduction, is distinguishing between these two. Because you can do something about the one on the left. The one on the right, you don't know and you cannot calculate the probability of the outcome. I find that really useful, so I'm sharing it far and wide at the moment to help project teams guide their decision making. And it leads us to this, treating cost reduction as a consequence rather than a driver. Again, I'll come back to that doesn't mean you can't get going fast. So number one on this, engage to understand who your customers are. We've seen that in evidence. What are they trying to accomplish and the needs they're seeking? On my next slide, I think it's my next slide, I'll talk you through a case study example. But collaboration to define the aim, what are you trying to accomplish here? And how do you serve the customers and what do the customers need to do even better is really useful to think about in the context of cost savings. As that's often missed. How can you bring along an improvement in the customer experience and the customer journey at the same time as delivering cost reduction? It's an opportunity missed on a very regular basis, and I hope that that sounds familiar to some of you. I mentioned earlier on about making sure you've got the right capabilities and right people, so the people that actually know how the work works. Engaging with that and doing so will tease out all kinds of things. And although I've written on the slide here, you may be surprised, I'll rephrase that. I guarantee you'll be surprised what you find. And finally, it's about this asking questions of inquiry. The example I just talked to you about there, about the general manager, once he got beyond his initial proposition, he did ask questions of inquiry. And we went and saw the work in action to understand what potential impacts this was going to have. And in his circumstance, there were some risks that he could calculate. Thinking about the risk versus uncertainty. The risks in his case were waste would increase more than offset the cost of the supply potentially being decreased. Productivity would be affected because the machines jammed more often with this other alternative product. And therefore his master output would be decreased. Those were risks that he could calculate, and based on the simulation that we ran for the week of production to test this cost-saving theory, it was dismissed. He disproved his own theory. But taking a purely accountancy view of it, you'd have looked at those numbers, and as painful as it is to me with my background in corporate finance and economics, that's the right decision to make. It's understanding the processes that generate those costs, this recurring theme that comes back and back and back. And what you're hearing here, and I think that example is similarly, builds upon this concept of organic complexity. And it's often the driver of unnecessary and avoidable cost. So think about a completely different company now, whose main objective in this circumstance was to provide their customers with the largest possible choice of products. Okay, that's listening to the market, listening to their customers. We want to be able to offer you as many products as we possibly can in order to satisfy the need. You could tick that off a strategy checklist. Are we saturating the market and taking advantage of every corner of the market possible? Yes. Do we provide a one-stop shop, for example, for our customers? Yes. Do they need to go anywhere else? No. So they come to us. However, what could be overlooked here? And if you jump from step 1 to step 6 on this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yes, economics working out well for me. Step 6 on here is by thinking you're responding. Remember that model, the assumptions and the decisions that have been made to offer the largest customer choice in this circumstance was resulting in poor customer service. How can that be? Let's just step through these processes simply. That large customer choice meant that the company had a complex product range. By having the complex product range, inadvertently, they had few economies of scale because their purchasing power was spread over so many SKUs, stock keeping units. Which in turn, because their cost of operation was increased, gave them comparatively high pricing. Okay, you could say, you could make a rational decision. We want to be a premium, we sell for premium prices because we offer the largest customer choice and they don't need to go anywhere else. That's fine when that results in great customer service. But in this circumstance, what we saw was really challenging logistics, dealing with this complex product range, selling it at a high price because you couldn't get the economies of scale. In this circumstance, the logistics were so complicated, there were so many opportunities for error, it resulted in poor customer service. So here about improving theories. At some point, there was a theory that the largest customer choice was the best place to be to succeed. But what they designed inadvertently was the perfect system to disappoint their customers on the right-hand side. And years of failing to understand the true root causes of the cost in the business and link it to what the customer values because it was being made on assumption led in this circumstances to years of cycles of cost cutting the wrong things. So breakthrough. Cutting the product range and reducing the product range significantly, where 65% of the product range contributed only 4% of the turnover, yet 23% of the inventory. By eliminating the tail and the slow movers, they achieved this outcome. Significantly reduced costs, increased sales and revenue and profitability, improved customer service, increased focus on top-end and high-earning products, reduction on waste on slower selling products, lowering the risk of obsolescence, and reduction in product packaging and waste, sending less to landfill. Win, 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 win. Because they challenged the current state and understood the processes by which they were generating undesirable cost. And I'm struck repeatedly by that cycle from the aspiration on the left, sorry, not cycle, the process here on the screen, the aspiration on the left to the result on the right. How far wrong can we get this thing? Suze.
So interesting couple of questions coming in around speed. And I know you've mentioned speed a few times. So one observation has been, it sounds like it takes a long time. Just thought I'd ask you to answer the room on that one.
A good job I'm not looking at the attendee list here because I think I can place who that question's come from. Yes, so does it need to take a lot of time? The answer has to be no, because the circumstances and stakeholders often require it. And I think that's about mindset of approach. If you use the PDSA approach to break the project down into chunks that you can test theories rapidly and evaluate the results quickly and therefore roll out at speed, it will yield dividends in terms of the rate of delivery of the savings. We have to be realistic with this. And I think one of the problems often with projects, big CI projects, is they are, as we call them, boil the ocean projects. And when you're dealing with financial cycles where a saving has been required or worse declared to the market in listed companies or declared to stakeholders in a specific quarter, well, jobs and livelihoods depend on that. So there is no room for maneuver. And what I'm saying here is by using these methods and putting your process in context and understanding where your customer is, there should be no reason for you not to be able to achieve the savings that are being required. at the pace that's required. And more importantly, do it like this and you'll do it sustainably so you can deliver them in future. And you won't have to undo them in 3 quarters time because you realize you no longer have the people that need to fulfill that seasonal demand, for example.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rich.
No worries. Thanks, Suze. So here it is again, the scientific approach to reducing costs. Mindset at the top, just beneath the title there, right down to results. So taking those and applying the principles, the methods we've been talking about, some of the tools to reduce waste, to increase capacity, to increase added value, to improve customer service, so on and so forth. In order that you get new customers, retained customers, you increase revenue, reduce costs, and increase profitability. This is not new thinking. This is new application. And this is new application of the thinking to cost reduction itself, to the traditional cost saving challenge of take that number out, get that number down. Think about it like this, use that model on the left, understand the processes that generate those results so that you can do this. Cost reduction just becomes part of how we do things around here. You'll have a means of detecting abnormalities when they happen. You'll rarely be surprised. You have a culture that trusts and supports you to interpret and respond to data appropriately when an abnormality is detected. You heard the genesis of that just starting to occur in the project I talked about earlier on with the general manager. You have a clear direction on what and when to escalate to others, should you be overwhelmed. And don't just sit on it and hope. For those of you who know me that are on the webinar, you'll notice a recurring theme of mine, the power of hope. Hope alone is not enough here, and it's destined to fail. You have a method that helps you find out the root cause of the problem. Think about the bottom part of that model. Don't just go for the results. Think about the root causes of those results that you're dissatisfied with. Once you have contained the situation, you can protect your customer, and you have a method to learn from any challenge, embedding the mitigations that are necessary to prevent reoccurrence. CI lesson 101 here, but applying it to cost savings, to the cost saving environments because of this here. Through the process innovation, you can efficiently, effectively, and adaptably respond with agility. And who doesn't want to do that? In order that we can deal with any challenge, not just the current one. So particularly relevant at the moment when the world's been shifting beneath our feet. We must make sure that the actions we take now in response to cost challenges don't cause problems further down the line, be it in the medium term or longer term. Think about that process context again. Okay, so moving into summary, just to reiterate some of the key points. Cost out should be the outcome, the result of an activity, and not necessarily the starting point. Innovation needs to be an intrinsic part of a business's culture. It's a leader's accountability to create and demonstrate a culture that nurtures that innovation. And it needs to be everyone's job to both run our business, you all responded to that in the poll earlier on, and improve our business. And if you have all of these and the things that I've talked about in this webinar, the cost out challenge will be immeasurably more effective and quicker. Okay, and that is me for now. So Suze, have you got any further questions from the desk?
There was one relating back to when earlier on when you were talking about risk versus uncertainty, you know, known, unknown, etc. And we had a question about the uncertainty related to well, we know something, but we have, I guess, the known unknown. So I guess the potential not to be able to quantify it, and how we manage that effectively.
You know, Donald Rumsfeld is making his presence felt here. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, great point. And it's about experimentation is the only way to answer that, and working out how you can simulate these things. But ultimately, it's a flawed think you can avoid all risk and all uncertainty. You can't. It's part of the natural world, it's part of the unnatural world. Risk and uncertainty exist. There needs to be a level at which you can be comfortable, which is why I'd say focus on the risks first in response to that. So where those risks are, the things you can measure, so you've got as many mitigations as you think are appropriate. And again, I'll say appropriate because a lot of the time risk management in circumstances like this, I'll try and mitigate every single risk there possibly is. You have to be comfortable with the risks that you are mitigating and how much energy it's worth expending. Things like safety, clearly there's no room for maneuver on that, and rightly so. But other areas of cost reduction programs, there may well be. And that's the way I'd approach it, distinguishing between those two, so you focus on the things you can actually do something about. That's the point of that slide.
And again, back to the question of speed. Do you have any advice for how you stop that? I mean, understanding corporate governance is important, but how you stop corporate governance slowing down the speed at which you want to travel in order to create the improvements and potential cost reductions?
So my immediate response to that is get the right people in the room and the right people on the team. My observation, certainly with corporate governance, that does slow things down, it's because authority levels with cost reduction, authority levels haven't been clearly established up front. Someone set off to go and research and understand where we can take some cost out, and then it takes forever to negotiate up and down, left and right, understand procurement contracts that may be in place, understand the leases on the sites, understand the leases on the equipment, the employment terms. So what I've just done there is list out a bunch of processes that you need representatives. I made that point earlier on about the expertise to know how the work works. That's what I mean. It doesn't mean a cast of thousands, but it does mean taking a few minutes to identify the interested parties that need to be involved in this to make effective decisions quickly. So yeah, that would be my response. So do you need someone from HR? If so, who? Do you need someone from finance? If so, who? Operations, so on, so on, so on. So that you've got all the expertise you need in the room at the time. Now, here's the other challenge with that, and I know you didn't ask me this, but I'm off now, Suze. Here's the other challenge with that in my observation. The wrong way about that is to invite the cast of thousands to the cost reduction challenge and have lots of different people that are all there for reasonable reasons and some logic behind why they're there. But if they aren't actively involved in the different stages, they will stop turning up to meetings at a very practical level. They'll become disengaged, and then it becomes a real drag to get them back engaged. So be sensitive to people's time. Coming back to your question about speed, be sensitive to the expertise. And some projects I've seen have costed out the time of the attendees to the meetings and worked out who needs to be at which meeting. That's about planning. So when we're talking governance, also think plan. And if you translate that into a plan of the stages of the project, when you actually need people at the different stages, and only have them involved then, but critically have them involved, informed, using tools like RACI, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, really simple tools. But doing that up front will help you understand who needs to be where at what point in the project.
Thank you very much. That's all of our questions answered today.
Okay, fantastic.
So before we close, just wanted to let everyone know for this autumn we have an offer really to assist anyone who enrolls on our public Lean Six Sigma, either Green Belt, Black Belt or Master Black Belt classes, to improve your virtual learning experience. One of the things that it's obviously become very apparent to us is that the technology is really essential to assist you to have the best learning experience when you're learning in the virtual classroom. So by giving you an iPad, it gives you a second device. I was actually talking to our public delegates this week, and they were able to use the Zoom on one screen on their laptops, and they were able to use the iPad that we'd sent them to help them participate in all of the activities and the simulations. And they found that second device really, really helpful. So if you are looking to attend Green black or master black belt course in the future, please do contact us. We'd be delighted to enroll you and equip you with an Apple iPad to improve your learning. And of course, once the training is complete, it's yours to keep. Please, everyone, look out for the Voice to Customer survey. You'll receive these shortly from us. We'd be really grateful for your feedback, both on today's session as well as suggestions for future topics. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. So on behalf of PMI, on behalf of Rich and myself, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for your questions.
Thank you, everyone.
And to wish you all a safe and relaxing weekend.
Cheers all. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.